two bodies of work. This is not going to be nearly as long or involved a talk as my last one. It's just going to be a quick little thing to familiarize you with what I'm thinking on these two new sort of groups of work that I'm introducing here tonight. The first is my new series, Mid-Century Midnight. So these paintings are ones that sort of sink their story in history. So I grew up very much in love with the 50s and 60s. I adore Rock Hudson Doris Day comedies. I grew up watching the Jetsons. And what's fascinating to me about this era of America is that America is experiencing this incredible economic post-war boom. There's a huge amount of optimism, and with that optimism, there's this sort of sense of a naive futurism. There's an advertisement that was in like a scrapbook I used to keep, which I couldn't find, but it was this fantastic picture of a 1950s housewife in like a gorgeous mid-century modern house, ironing with this massive shit-eating grin on her face, and like it just needs to be the thought bubble, like, why one day I'll be ironing my husband's uniform on the moon, and I mean, to be fair, like the Wright brothers fly a plane in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. It's the first. Technically, it's actually not the first recorded flight. There was somebody in Australia who did it about a year earlier, but no one recorded it. But from flying the first biplane to boots on the moon is 60 years. I mean, it's nothing. It's a blip in geologic time, and it's not really even that long in terms of human evolution, socially, culturally, or technologically. And that kind of optimism of the 50s, I mean, I still feel jilted that I don't have a flying car today. What do we have? Really small phones. I mean, that's the future that we dreamed of. Where's my robot? Servant, And then, of course, to be fair, that entire era too, in addition to its sort of naively optimistic futurism, also everything that I loved about the 50s, the looks, the fashion, the humor, the quaintness, the sense of style, was all a veneer over deeply entrenched misogyny, simmering racism, an attitude towards gay people that at best considered us subhuman, and worst, wouldn't even acknowledge that we existed. I can't even tell you how scandalized I was when I found out that Rock Hudson was gay. The guy that as a little boy I lusted after, who was straight, you make straight. And I was like, wait, what? So, but one of the interesting things to come out of that era is mid-century modern architecture. And what I love about mid-century, I've always loved modern architecture in general, but a lot of like new modern, there's a lot of glass and steel, there's a lot of white, there can sometimes, not always, but there can sometimes be a sense of hardness. And what I love about mid-century is that it combines the quaintness of sort of like a den with shag carpeting and wood paneling, where your husband would inevitably expect a martini to be ready for him when he walked in the door from the ad agency. And you served it to him with a smile, even if you had had a horrific day. And that sort of sense of airiness, of light, of clean lines, of open floor plans, which was very revolutionary at the time, but with a sense of warmth and spaces that were intended to be lived in, is something that I fell in love with at a very young age, because the house that we lived in when I was 5 was a mid-century modern. And I don't have a lot of memories. Like most people who had pleasant childhoods, there's very few really vivid memories. It's sort of just a generalized sense of well-being. But there are very specific images that I remember from that house, and I think it's why I love that architecture to today. And living in the San Francisco Bay Area, there was a very revolutionary architect, probably is the biggest name in mid-century modern when it comes to mid-century modern for the masses, is Joseph Eichler. These are examples of Eichler homes. I grew up very close to an Eichler subdivision in Walnut Creek called Rancho San Miguel, which I used to drive through just looking at houses. I actually got pulled over doing that once. What are you doing here? Yeah. Yeah, well, he spent a little bit too much time like arranging his shirt before he got out of the car, so I'm like, okay. But yeah, so here in Tucson, one of the things that I became really excited about when we had decided to move long before I knew this about Tucson, but I was really surprised to discover that there is a lot of mid-century modern architecture here in Tucson. And one example is Oxman Homes. So these are two old advertisements for Oxman Homes. There's this, notion of like, champagne living. Again, that sense of just like, you walk into your house. Well, of course you're gonna have a glass of champagne. That's what this house is for. This advertisement, Herbert Oxman is revolting. He's rebelling against small windows, dark spaces. He wants big spaces, light. There's another advertisement that shows like the per square foot volume of glass in an Oxman home versus a standard tract home at the time. So that brings us to my neighborhood, Windsor Park, which is a Herbert Oxman development designed by architects of Ambrose and Swanson. And so this one is just a house in the neighborhood. This one on the other side is actually the house that I lovingly restored. It is now a rental property. Our tenants are moving in very shortly. My parents bought that as an investment property. It's literally a 30-second walk out my back gate. Yeah, word to the wise, renovating an entire house is a job. So I'm very glad that it's over. But I love my neighborhood. And one of the things that I experienced in that neighborhood, we have dogs, and I am not a morning person. So Guy gets up early in the morning and walks the dogs in the morning. We walk them together in the late afternoon. They run outside during the day, when we can watch them. And then I take them out for the late night, 10:30 to 11 p.m. last call pee of the evening. And I've really grown to love wandering through our mid-century modern neighborhood at night because these interesting shaped windows, the trapezoids, the long, skinny, clear stories, it's just they're such interesting shapes as they hang glowing in the darkness. And that inspired me to do this series of paintings. They're just around the corner there. There's 3 of them. They're little 9x12 studies called Mid-Century Midnight. These are 1, 2, and 3. And these are homes in my neighborhood. They're painted in a very, those of you who've seen my talks before or watched my videos know that my typical painting process is very arduous. It's a lot of layering, it's a lot of building up, it's a process, there's a sanding down, and it requires a tremendous amount of planning. So these were my attempt to sit down and just do a fucking painting. Not plan it, not think about it, not overthink it, not design it, just trust that I know enough about composition and how to make something look beautiful to just have an idea and sit down and do it. So these are like very rare for me, like one sitting paintings. These are effectively one-day paintings. Not 10-hour day, but one-day paintings. And it was just a real delight to do this. I loved playing with the light. I've always liked nocturns. And for me, the notion of doing them as nocturns was both because that was the original inspiration, but also like, I thought to myself, well, who wants a painting of somebody else's house? Even if you love mid-century modern architecture, what can I do to elevate it and make it about more than just here's cool architecture? And it was this notion of the light and the sense of atmosphere that I think elevates it. So for me, there's something about, as a homebody, walking around at night and looking at that inviting warmth from windows, but also the sense of ever so faint voyeurism that comes along with that to me brings to mind Edward Hopper, who's an artist that I've always really admired. There's a sense of, I'm very careful to not show people in these paintings, and I wouldn't even if I caught somebody in one of my photographs. These are based on like quick little cell phone photographs that I take when I'm out at night, and then I revisit the site the next day, because obviously night photography is terrible. Even with the good quality phones we have nowadays. But they communicate both that sense of warmth and invitingness, but there's also something just ineffably and immediately identifiable as modern about the shapes of the windows themselves. So that's really what these paintings are about. This is the logo that I designed for Windsor Park Community, which is the neighborhood association that I founded in our neighborhood. And we are currently fundraising heavily for a bid to have our neighborhood listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which will save historically qualifying homes about 45% on their property taxes every year for 30 years. So it's a very good deal. And even for those houses that don't qualify, mine doesn't, there's still the sort of general increase of the value of the neighborhood, the profile of the neighborhood. And we're doing a lot of really strong community involvement. We've got a welcome wagon where people get a gift basket when they move to the neighborhood. We've just started a meal train. If there's neighbors that have recovering from a surgery or the death of a loved one, we all get together and sign up to bring them meals. We've recently started doing wash cleanups, and we host an annual block party. The goal of painting those paintings was because I needed a break from my routine and I wanted to do them when they were fun. The other idea is that when they sell, I've told Chris that he's not writing a check to me, he's writing it to Wizard Park Community LLC, and that those funds will go towards our historical status project. So that is my mid-century modern project. The paintings that you see on the wall right now, to properly put those in context, the story begins with a little hiccup in all of our lives called COVID-19. During that time, and again, because my work is so labor intensive and because my work is so process heavy, I do occasionally have this desire to just do something fun and direct and where I'm not thinking too much. So one day, feeling fairly crappy, as I was, as we all were, and feeling nervous and scared about where's my next paycheck gonna come from with all my galleries closed down, I sat down and did a quick little mixed media study combining graphite, watercolor, acrylic, and colored pencil of a vermilion flycatcher. That's the one you see here. And I thought, you know what, just for the heck of it, I'm gonna post this on Facebook. And it said, the post was $300 to the first person who sends me a private message, postage included. These are 7.5 by 10 inches, which is a size determined by the premium watercolor board that I like to do these types of studies on. That's a good size that you can cut up a full board into with no wastage, is what, and it happens to fit perfectly in a priority mail envelope. Anyway, I posted it on Facebook and I sold it in 6 minutes. And I thought, okay. So I started doing more of them. And more of them. And more of them. And most of them were birds at first, but I started to expand to some other subjects. And the postscript is that between 2020 and 2023, I sold well over 100 of these, all just through Facebook. I would put out a post on like a Wednesday saying, I'm gonna post a new study Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Be ready. And again, it would sell within minutes or seconds. And then I got a ton of people who started sending me messages through Messenger saying, we've been sitting here hovering over our computer trying to nab one of your studies for the last month. We're never quick enough. My favorite bird is thus and such. What do? You know, could you do that for me? So I ended up selling probably more of them as sort of first rights of refusal than I sold directly through Facebook itself. So I did quite a lot of these over the years. And what I really enjoyed about them was trusting myself to make decisions spontaneously that I would ordinarily labor over, and just sort of loosening up and having some fun with it. And that's why someone asked the question why they're called studies. That is why they're called studies. And to be fair, quite a few of these have ultimately become studies in the truest sense. They have been successful enough on a small scale that I've done a larger scale or a more finished or complete version of them. So I continue to call them studies for that reason. Also because they are directly painted, because there's a certain portion of the board that is still the white of the page, I can afford to make them a lower cost item than my acrylics on board, where every centimeter of the board is labored over in some way or another. And because because they are worked directly, there wasn't a study for those studies. The study is the study. So because I can work them more directly, because they're more spontaneous, it means that I can offer them as a lower price point item. And also something that when I've just done, say for instance, a 4-foot by 6-foot saguaro painting that I spent whatever the hell, how many months on, I can say, you know what, I just feel like doing something where I actually feel like I accomplished something today. And that means starting something and finishing it. And it's a very nice feeling. Start to do a lot of kind of sonora and desert specific things. These were both first rights for refusal for the same client, actually. One of the sonora and desert tone. One of the interesting things that started to happen with these is this. So Chris and I have talked about this. There's a weird phenomenon that happens that I think all artists will relate to. Every tight artist wants to be loose, and every loose artist wants to be tight. And I think it's just a sort of natural byproduct of that, like, you know, the work that you create is a product of your personality, and you just sort of naturally gravitate towards things. But if you're someone like me, who tends to do a lot of very tight work, I love things that are loose. I love things that are spontaneous. I love it when, I recently bought some paintings by this Serbian artist, Andrew Denman, and they're both paintings of cats that he's done in like 3 brushstrokes that bleed out. And it's so shocking to me how much is communicated with so little. And I just think, and I know how much skill it takes to do it. The painting itself is probably done in 10 minutes, but it's as a result of years and years and years of being able to make those perfect decisions quickly, spontaneously, and you know, with like muscle memory. And that's something I'm always a little bit envious of. So these are about as close as I can get to doing that, where I allow for the bleeding of the paint, I allow for this. But one of the things I noticed is that as I worked on these, over the 3 years in particular that I produced so many of them, they started to get more and more developed, tighter and tighter, more and more finished. Just because that's the natural evolution of who I am as a human being. Which led me to, in 2023, I decided to, so all of the pieces you've seen so far have been that same 7.5 by 10 inch format, either vertical or horizontal. These two are twice-sided, they're 10 by 15. Chris sold both of these. These were my first attempts at using this style, but trying to use it to create a more finished piece and something on a larger scale. I think they were successful, but the problem with them is that they still have to be hung under glass, which is something that I'll get to in a moment, how I'm sort of moving away from that. And the other thing I started doing is, I do have 2 galleries in England that I've been working with for a number of years. And I initially started with both of those galleries selling drawings because it's so much cheaper to ship. And I can ship unframed drawings and then they frame them over there. And I can ship, you know, 20 paintings in one package for the same amount that it would cost me to ship one acrylic uncradled board. But again, because it's the only work that's representing me over there, again, my tendency is to tend towards increasingly finished work, even in this improvisational, sit down, do it directly with no study work kind of style. And this is an example of that.
Andrew, before you go on, we have Jane's an artist, she's in the room, and I've got a lot of artists who are going to watch this video.
Yeah.
You did 100 paintings in a matter of time.
Yeah.
Artists do plein air, artists do a lot of things for exercise, for muscle memory. And what would you recommend artists? Do you like giving the advice, because you're an instructor as well, for artists to get away from their studio work and develop an exercise where they get to be improvisational? And did you learn, is it a meaningful moment in your life where it translated to this?
It is.
The bigger pieces.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm still trying to reconcile is, as I start to, say, for instance, close out the pattern series, which is coming to a close, as I start moving on to other things, how do I take the spontaneity of these works and translate those into my elaborate studio process? And I don't actually know the answer to that yet. What I will say, and this is the advice that I would give to artists, is the best thing that you can do is always something different. If you're, because there's no prison that's worse than the one that you build yourself brick by brick. And I've seen plenty of artists who bring something new and exciting to the marketplace, and God help them, it becomes incredibly popular, and 10 years later they're still doing the exact same thing, and they feel like they can't change because the marketplace has an expectation of them. What I was very fortunate to get some very good advice early in my career, and it's something I've maintained also just because it's the person that I am. But I've always said that the only thing that a person should be surprised by at an Andrew Denman show is if they are not surprised by something. So if I'm excited to paint something, to do something different, I'm just gonna do it, and people are either gonna like it or they're not gonna like it, and those experimentations, those one-offs, may inform your next 40 paintings, or they may not at all. And it's okay for either one of those things. The true people who follow and love your art don't expect you to be the same person 20 years from now that you are today. The only people who have that expectation are gallerists who don't want to do the work to convince clients that your new body of work is as valuable as your old body of work. And present company does not have that issue, yay. But a lot of gallerists do. And then, because from their standpoint, well, I've already built this reputation for you with this type of work. Why do I want to start from scratch? It's like, well, because your other option is that I keep doing this until I'm bored stiff and it shows in the work. I have a very good friend in England who, he's now passed away sadly, but he confided in me that he said, I've been doing paintings, and he was terribly successful, like commissions for the royal family, all of that. He says, Andrew, I've been doing these paintings for 20 years and I've been bored out of my skull for 10. That is not something I like to hear from an artist, but I think it's very common. So, so there comes a point where if you allow for your muse to guide you, if you allow for inspiration to take you in whatever direction it takes you in, at the very least, you're constantly injecting new ideas into your work, and if you're a working artist, into the marketplace. So at the very least, nobody can say, oh, I'm just so shocked. He's painted this his whole life. What the hell is this? You know, like, no one's ever going to say that about me because I'm always introducing something new. Case in point, this piece recently, which I did, this sold at my gallery in England. So I'm fascinated by the Icarus myth. I love doing figurative work. I haven't done it in years. But yeah, this was a piece that I just really wanted to do, and I thought to myself, well, it combines my love of a lot of different things, including birds. I'll just do it and see what happens. And this piece I do consider a study. It's like, I don't know, it's like yay by yay. I think it's like 10 by 15, but you know, I would like to do this as a 40 by 60 painting. And if it never turns into that, so what? So as I'm doing these pieces, because like I said, this is pretty much all I'm sending to the UK are these study type pieces on watercolor board, they're getting more and more refined as I go. And these are two of the most recent pieces that I just sent to one of my UK galleries. Speaking of experimentation, one of the things that I started thinking about is this. So also speaking of England, I mentioned earlier that it's always harder to sell works under glass. This is for a lot of reasons. Part of it is that it's harder to hang pieces that are under glass because you have to worry about reflection. And you can buy museum glass, but it's very expensive. And even museum glass, you still see some reflection if you're hanging in like a brightly sunlit room. You just do. The other issue, and I think this is a carryover from the collapse of the print market in the early 2000s, is that people, so many people bought prints at a time when it was all offset litho and everything was like double or triple matted, framed under glass. And there just kind of, I think, came to be this sort of general sense that like a piece under glass is a print, not an original. And interestingly, I do not have this problem with the marketplace in England at all, because England did not have the robust print market for reproductions by living artists that the US had. So they don't have that bias. My works are all framed under glass in the UK, and it makes not a bit of difference. They sell very well. But here, I wanted to think, okay, well, if I like doing these study pieces, if I like being, in between bigger projects where I'm being a bit more labor intensive, if I like being more improvisational, how do I do that and not frame it under glass? So last year I did some experiments. So I tried two different things. One, because I love working on cradle board because of its stability and solidity, it has some heft to it. So I found a product which is, there's a couple different ones. The one I used was golden absorbent ground, but it's basically a medium like a gesso that you paint on the board, and it's supposed to absorb wet media like watercolor paper. And that's what this piece was. So it was the same process that you've seen me using: graphite drawing, watercolor bleed, acrylic over that, some colored pencil and pencil work, painting is done. So I did it on this product, and I'm really happy with I did 2 pieces like this, and I liked both of them, but I didn't like the way that the material felt when I was working it. It just didn't, it kind of worked, but it just didn't respond the same way that a paper product really does. So then I thought, for the next experiment, what I did was I took a cradle board and I mounted my usual watercolor board with acid-free glue to the surface, and then painted the way that I ordinarily would, and then when it was all done, I lacquered the surface of the piece to sort of plasticize the paper product and thereby enable one to hang it without glass. And I know a lot of different artists who are increasingly doing that. I know one guy who's doing charcoal drawings and lacquering them. I know at least 2 artists who are doing watercolors and lacquering them so they can be hung without glass. So this painting of the Chakwala was my first experimentation in that. And I really liked how it came out. And after the lacquering, to sort of plasticize the board, I still use the same UV-resistant spray varnish I use on all my paintings, which has a very matte finish. So weirdly, when it was all said and done, it didn't look any different than how the watercolor board looks by itself, which is ideal. I mean, I couldn't have asked for more. Those experimentations, I thought to myself, well, that went well. Let's try to do some more of those. And because I needed a break after doing this giant saguaro painting, I thought I would experiment with the pieces that you see here today. And that's it.